Michelle Kwak is here with us. She's a student at American University. She's the standing president of Peace of East Asia through Creative Engagement, a highly regarded academic student organization at the university, where she's also pursuing a dual degree in International Studies and Asian Studies. Her passion primarily lies in international development, particularly in international law concerning disability rights and reform policy in East Asia. She was appointed as a youth ambassador for peace by the Washington, D.C. Korean Council in 2016, and her academic work and research has recently been recognized by the Korean Ministry of Defense. Her experience working with several international non-governmental organizations has fed her academic interest in examining media rhetoric as a tool to shift public policy and opinion.
Hi. Again, it's lovely to be here, and it's an honor to kind of give my 2 cents on what's going on in the world, I guess. And so kind of coming from, in the last panel, someone asked the question, what's the role of youth in terms of world peace? And so I hope to kind of share my opinions and, to share. The second leg of this panel kind of asks the questions, is truth and reconciliation achievable? And for me, I'm Korean American, so I'm coming from a context of the current status quo of the Korean Peninsula. And so I'm sure all of you have heard about the 5th nuclear testing by DPRK. And so there's been a lot of talks about where our world is headed and where our security is headed. I was actually able to attend the conference, the 4th U.S. ROK dialogue at the Wilson Center this past week. And and I kind of wanted to talk about what we as the youth kind of see in terms of what's going on in East Asia and how we could address it. And so, as you know, because of the 5th nuclear testing, there's rising tensions and hostile rhetoric being passed between the United States and DPRK and even within the South Korean government. So my past research has been on how foreign policy, the rhetoric used between states, was able to shift public opinion. And this time around, though, I really want, like we kind of talked about today, how, as a civil society, we can influence change within our governments and how our governments interact with other states. And so, one form of reconciliation, I kind of wanted to redefine reconciliation through this opportunity to speak. A lot of people, when we say reconciliation, it's post-disarmament or post-conflict. But I would like to kind of pose it, what if we use reconciliation as a means to achieve some sort of peace or achieve or catalyze state movement towards peace? And so actually, within the context of, North Korea and South Korea, in the late 1990s and early into the 2000s, Korea actually did move towards a reconciliation policy called the Sunshine Policy. It was induced by President Kim Tae-jung, and I kind of wanted to share the little the fable that inspired this reconciliation policy. It's a Korean fable, and in our legends it said that there was a man who was stubbornly wearing a coat, right? And there are 2 elements. There was the wind and the sun, and both elements wanted this man to take off the coat. But the 2 elements kind of were arguing amongst each other who could get the coat off quickest or most effectively. And so they kind of made a deal, and then they said, okay, go and try to take this man's coat off. So the wind decided, okay, I'm going to try to blast the coat off of the man. And so it rushed and, tried to take off his clothing, but it didn't work. And then the sun said, okay, watch this. And then as the sun grew warmer and warmer and warmer, the man himself took off the coat because he was hot. And so President Kim, he said, let's take a similar approach to DPRK in terms of disarmament. Let's induce, let's engage our civil societies. Let's be warm to our North Korean counterparts. Let's open up trade deals. Let's open up economic opportunities. Let's invest in their society. And it worked fairly well, actually. And although a lot of critics say, it was a failed policy, within the context of North and South Korea, it surprisingly did soften some sort of communication between the two. However, conflicts started to arise when, with the next wave of presidency in South Korea, legal institutions were denouncing, the nuclear armament and proliferation in North Korea. And that put South Korea in a position where it had to choose between its commitment to reunification with North Korea or its commitment to the international community. And that's where we stand today. We see that in our geopolitics in the East Asian region. We see South Korea continually being in the spot of having to choose between its alliances with, the United States and other international, global powers, and its relationship with its brother country. So it kind of trickled down to, when it came to peace in East Asia or peace on the Korean Peninsula, it kind of trickles down to the discussion of nuclear security. And if you ever Googled nuclear security or if you ever looked it up, it's kind of a circle of, it's a kind of like a fast hole into pessimism when it comes to peace. I was, when I was at the dialogue, they kept mentioning it's reconciliation between the two states is impossible without conflict. And I was highly disturbed by that because there has to be some alternative way for these two states to engage with one another without invoking mass casualties or war or even, violent denuclearization. And so I started thinking to myself, what kinds of way could we engage the two states to have a peaceful transition into a more unified region, right? And I think that kind of lies within what we were kind of emphasizing and what the role of the civil society is and what the role of we as, I think I'm the only Korean person here, but what can we do as global citizens to encourage our governments to, start talking to one another and to start talking about peaceful resolution? And I think it's difficult to say. So I had it's when we think about reconciliation, I think we kind of emphasize, without government help, we can't, or a government initiation, we can't have peace. I think that's a general kind of consensus amongst the South Korean natives, my counterparts in South Korea, and so they're saying, if governments, if they say that a peaceful transition is impossible, it must be. And I think that's the public opinion that I believe needs to be shifted. And so that was a lot of my research and my presentations to the Korean Ministry of Defense and also the Ministry of Unification was trying to say, hey, can we focus on shifting public opinion? And there was some resistance, I guess, in terms of they wanted to, with rising tensions with, the nuclearization of and nuclear testing, they were like, we can't put a lot of resource into public diplomacy at this time. And I think that was discouraging, but it also opened up an opportunity for us as youth to step in where resources were kind of limited. And I think for us, or for myself, as a Korean American, I see my role in this unification process as being engaging with my South Korean counterparts and having those discussions of how can we overcome cultural barriers. And I worked with North Korean defectors this past summer, and I never thought we could overcome our cultural barriers or our political differences or ideological differences. But over time, the public engagement and that human-to-human interactions were able to overcome our differences. And so for me, I felt like I was able to reconcile my views or our differences through public diplomacy and those initiatives that the government kind of aren't able to fully extend their resources to. And so I think, in my opinion, I think it's difficult for people who are outside the context of East Asia to kind of understand why things are the way they are. And I think it's difficult for people who don't have ties to South Korea or in East Asia in general to kind of pick up anything about peace, especially with, in your media, you hear again and again, North Korea is building up capabilities to, bomb, the United States. And there's a lot of hostility in that rhetoric. However, as a civil society, if we start to shift our rhetoric and try to shift our views on North Korea, I think it's difficult because we, residing in the United States, we live in that kind of culture of nuclear fear with our history of the Cold War. But I think it's time for us to kind of reevaluate how we exchange, foreign policy and how we kind of interact with our state. And, even little shifts in rhetoric induces a more peaceful application, I guess. And so, I'm not sure how to conclude here, but I really do resonate with what civilian peace advocacy can do and will do. And I hope that, this issue of reconciliation and reunification in South Korea and North Korea, I believe, can be a case study and a projection of how we can work with legal institutions and work with the international community as a civil society to bring about peace. And so, yeah.